Today we will be looking at bankruptcy filing trends by chapter in the state of Georgia. To do this, we have about a dozen charts showing bankruptcy activity in the state going back to 1990. All of the filing data comes from the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. Now, this first chart shows total filings by year since 1990. During that time, there have been more than 1.5 million cases filed in the state of Georgia. That's fourth highest in the country, even though Georgia's only ninth in population. In the early 1990s, filings were running between 40 and 50,000 most years. This jumped up to a little over 60,000 generally by the late 1990s. Continued increases in the early 2000s up to about 80,000 cases. The peak year was 2005. Filings were 81,000. That was the year of bankruptcy reform. But one thing that distinguishes Georgia was there wasn't a huge run-up in filings, or compared to what happened in most other states had a very large increase in 2005. There was a drop down to about 40,000 in 2006, and even this drop was much less than average. Filings got back up to nearly the peak levels in 2010 during the Great Recession, and have dropped back to about 50,000 in 2015. So right now, filings are a little higher than they were in the early 1990s, but well below where they were in the, say, 10 years prior to bankruptcy reform. Now, looking at bankruptcies relative to population, Georgia has always had a very high rate. And actually, on this chart, the states in red have very high bankruptcy rates. The states in yellow, mainly in the Northeast, tend to have very light bankruptcy rates. Georgia has been 69% above average since 1990, which is second highest in the country. Tennessee is the perennial leader. Georgia has never been first, but they have been second highest in the country 15 times. If we look at it year by year, you can see that basically every year Georgia has been quite high compared to the national average. But the gap was a little bit lower in 2005 because there wasn't as big an increase in Georgia as there was in many other states. Okay, looking at Chapter 7 filings by year. In the early 1990s, filings were just a little under 20,000 most years, went to a little above 20,000 by in the late 1990s. Kind of a big run-up in the early 2000s up to around 35,000 cases. You can see that there's a small surge in filings in 2005, the year of bankruptcy reform, and then a big, about two-thirds drop off the next year. Filings got back up to near peak levels in 2010, while the Great Recession as a result of that, and then have dropped by nearly one half since 2010. And so right now filings are about the same as they were from, say, 1997 to 2000. Now, Chapter 11 filings, you can see that there was a huge drop in the state throughout the 1990s, and this very much paralleled what happened nationwide. Since from 2000 to 2008, filings were running about 250 to 300 a year. Went up quite a bit during and after the recession, and are down two-thirds from that peak, and generally lower than what they were, say, in the early 2000s right now in the state. So in 2015, less than 200 cases in the state. Chapter 13 filings in Georgia, you can see that this chart is flatter than some of the others as far as the ups and downs, but generally increased from the low 20,000s to over 40,000 by the early 2000s. Drop off in 2006, then up during the Great Recession, but not to peak levels, and then a modest decrease of about a quarter since 2010, where Chapter 7 filings are down by half. And but the main thing here is that there are a lot of Chapter 13s in Georgia, and there isn't that much annual variation compared to other types of bankruptcy. Now, looking at the percent of cases that are filed as Chapter 13, the red line here is the national average by year, and you can see that it really hugs the 30% line nearly every year, with some disruption before and after bankruptcy reform. In Georgia, they've been in the 50 to 70% range each year, and some ups and downs, but still quite a bit higher than the national average. And this is typical of most states in the Southeast. There is some variation within the state. In the Northern District, only about 47% of the cases in 2015 were Chapter 13. In the Middle District, it was 69%, and the Southern District, 80% Chapter 13s, which is about the highest in the country. The Chapter 12 cases were higher in Georgia in the 1990s. Generally 40 to 60 per year was kind of the normal range. From 2000 to 2004, there's a lot of disruption of whether or not Chapter 12 was even available. And since then, we've seen some ups, particularly during the recession, and right now we're down to about 30 per year across the state, and most of those come in the Middle District of Georgia. Now, this chart shows the unemployment rate by quarter in the state on the blue line compared to the red columns, which is national average. And Georgia's followed the national pattern pretty closely, although from about 2008 up until the present, the unemployment rate in Georgia has been just slightly above the national average, maybe 1 to 2% at the most above the average. And you can see that the gap was a little bit wider, say from 2010, 2011, which indicates a little slower recovery from the recession than happened nationwide. Bankruptcy filings peaked nationwide in September 2010, the most recent peak, and have been going down since then. By June 2016, the national average had gone down 49%. In Georgia, the decline has only been 37%, and that is typical. The Southeast has had smaller declines than most of the other country. These are the yellow-colored states. And in the Northeast part of New England and the Southwest, the declines have been higher, over 60%. But in Georgia, down 37% over this time. Northern District down 39%, Middle 34%, and the Southern District only down 31% in that time. So it's a lower than average decline from where they were in 2010. Looking at it quarter by quarter, you can see that most quarters, Georgia, which is the blue columns, the decline has been close to the average, national average, but they follow the same pattern, but the declines tend to be just a little smaller than what was happening nationwide. Right now, some kind of unclear pattern or whether filings are going to go up or down, but so far in the first 6 months of 2016, nationwide filings were down 5.9% versus 4.8% in Georgia. The third quarter looks like Georgia was down about 10%. So as far as the outlook, it appears that there'll be less than 50,000 cases filed in Georgia in 2016, and probably under 200 Chapter 11s in the state. I'm projecting slight increases in the coming years, but I don't see any return to the 80,000 or so cases per year that the state got, say, from 2001 to 2005, unless another recession hits or there's some major change to the bankruptcy laws. Well, that concludes our look at bankruptcy filings in Georgia. For more statistical information and other information on bankruptcy, be sure to visit the newsroom section of the ABI website at www.abi.org.